It started like any slow Saturday afternoon, the kind where nothing ever happens until it suddenly does. I was backing out of my driveway when I heard the sickening crack of glass. I stopped dead, heart pounding, and saw my car window blown to pieces. Before I could even register what had happened, a kid, maybe 16, was standing there with a grin that screamed victory. He still had the rock or whatever it was in his hand. The realization hit me. This wasn't an accident. It felt pointed. I ran toward him, but he didn't flinch. He laughed. The kind of laugh that's pure mockery, the kind that makes you see red. Then his mother appeared at the fence, peering over with that look you know too well. Self-righteous, entitled, convinced the world owes her, Karen. Of course, it was Karen, the neighborhood's infamous HOA Karen, the same woman whose emails about grass height make everyone roll their eyes, the same woman whose son apparently found smashing a stranger's property hilarious. In a heartbeat, my quiet afternoon turned into chaos. I forced myself to breathe and kept my voice steady. "Your son just smashed my car window," I said. My hands were shaking, but I kept my tone calm. The boy shrugged. Karen stepped forward with all the condescension she could muster. "He's a kid," she said, dripping with patronizing sympathy. "Kids do dumb things. Don't make a fuss." Around us, neighbors peeked out of curtains, whispering, choosing sides. But this was never just about a broken window. It was about respect, responsibility, and the little unwritten rules that keep a neighborhood from sliding into nonsense. What none of them, especially Karen, realized in that moment was who I was. I wasn't just another resident. I was the HOA's lawyer. The rules she loved to flaunt and weaponize were my rules to enforce. The smug look in her son's eyes was about to meet a very cold reality. I looked down at the glittering shards of glass on the driveway. I and my mind went straight to options. Call the police, demand restitution, or use the HOA regulations to put pressure on Karen for failing to control her kid. This was a signal, a boundary test, and I decided right then I'd show them what happens when you underestimate someone who knows the law inside and out. Would I confront them head on, or set something up so they'd regret crossing me? The answer would come soon enough. That night, I sat watching the broken glass like it was a puzzle. Most people would just file an insurance claim, get the window fixed, and try to move on. Not me. I had an edge they didn't know about. I knew the bylaws, who was responsible for what, and how to turn a petty act of vandalism into a binding obligation. First step, gather proof. I photographed every angle of the damage, logged the scene, and even captured the likely path the rock had taken. The bylaws were explicit. Residents are accountable for damage caused by them or their guests. This wasn't a mere inconvenience. It was a violation I could use. The next afternoon, I tested the waters. I strolled past their house under the guise of casual neighborly chit-chat. Karen was trimming her roses like nothing had happened. Her son was dribbling a basketball against the driveway wall, the same cocky grin still stuck on his face. I smiled, hung around a beat longer than politeness required, letting my presence set off a slight unease. I dropped small comments about their weekend and watched Karen's body language. Little tics, defensiveness when she mentioned her son. She had no idea every word might be evidence of negligence under HOA rules. I documented it all quietly. The way she answered, the look she gave when I brought up kids being responsible. By the time I left, I had a mental map of the leverage I was building. That evening, I reread the bylaws, and it felt almost too simple. The rules spelled out restitution for property damage and spelled consequences for repeated negligence, fines, penalties, and potentially legal action. Karen had crossed a line without knowing it. What I needed next was psychological. Make her feel that twinge of dread that comes when the consequences start to seem real. So I planned carefully. A friendly knock, a conversation that seemed casual but carried the weight of authority, and a few well-timed reminders about obligations as a homeowner. Subtle, unavoidable, and inexorable. By the time I finished planning, I had an approach that was equal parts polite and inevitable. A slow, methodical correction that would make sure Karen and her son understood exactly what happens when you treat someone else's property like a joke. Karen wouldn't know whether to laugh it off or panic, but one thing was certain. She couldn't ignore me, and her son was about to learn what real accountability looked like. The only question now wasn't what I would do, but when. Timing mattered. I needed the perfect moment, when they least expected it, but when I could still keep things clean, civil, and precise. And luckily for me, that moment came sooner than I'd imagined. It was midweek, a bright, quiet afternoon. Most neighbors were out running errands, which made it the perfect time to make my move. Karen was trimming her hedge, pretending life was normal, while her son dribbled his basketball in the driveway, carefree. I picked up my folder, thick with evidence, photos, notes, and a neatly printed copy of the HOA bylaws. This wasn't about intimidation. This was about making it official. I walked toward her property with calm, deliberate steps. Karen looked up, and that confident smile faltered ever so slightly. That crack, that moment of doubt in her eyes, was exactly what I'd been waiting for. "Hi, Karen," I said, keeping my voice light but firm. "I'd like to talk about the incident with my car." Her son froze mid-dribble, sensing the shift in the air. Karen shifted, trying to sound casual. "Oh, that. It was just a mistake. He's a kid, you know," she said, waving her hand like it was nothing. I slowly opened my folder and laid the contents on her patio table. Evidence, documentation, HOA regulations, each page stacked with quiet power. "This isn't just about a kid's mistake," I replied evenly. "According to our HOA bylaws, residents are responsible for any damage caused by themselves or their family members. Repeated negligence has consequences." Karen's confidence started to waver. Her fingers tapped nervously against the table. "I mean, I don't think it's that serious. We can just, settle this privately," she stammered, reaching for control that wasn't there anymore. I leaned in slightly, no raised voice, no threats, just controlled authority. "Settling privately is an option," I said. "But the rules exist for a reason. If they're ignored, they set a precedent, and no one in this neighborhood wants that." The next steps could involve fines, formal warnings, or restrictions within the HOA. Her son looked down at his sneakers. The laughter he'd thrown in my face that Saturday was no longer armor. It was evidence. Karen opened her mouth, but nothing came out. She'd backed herself into a corner. "I'm giving you a chance to address this responsibly before it escalates," I continued, calm but unwavering. "Restitution for the damage is required, and supervision going forward is non-negotiable. If there's another incident, it will be treated far more seriously." For the first time since I'd known her, Karen looked genuinely unsettled. Her voice dropped to a mutter. Okay. We'll take care of it." I closed the folder and gave a polite, measured smile. Not out of friendliness, but to make it unmistakably clear. This was serious. Underestimating me had been a costly mistake. As I walked away, I glanced back. Karen and her son exchanged a silent, nervous look neither of them would forget. What began as a broken window had turned into something bigger, a reckoning. The next few days were quiet. Too quiet. Karen and her son kept their heads down, repairing the damage, offering mumbled apologies, walking a little more carefully around me. But entitlement that's been allowed to grow doesn't disappear overnight. I stayed alert. A week later came the true test, a scheduled HOA meeting at the community clubhouse. Karen was required to attend. I showed up early, my folder tucked neatly under my arm. Not because I planned to use it, but to remind myself of the leverage it represented. When Karen walked in, her shoulders were tense, her son trailing silently behind her. I greeted them with the same polite calm I'd always used. But this time, the balance of power was different. As the meeting began, the discussion shifted, almost naturally, to property damage, rule enforcement, and accountability. Karen tried to change the subject, but the chairwoman, unaware of our personal history, steered the conversation right back to the issue of consequences for repeated negligence. I didn't have to say a word. Karen's discomfort did all the talking. Eyes in the room caught her hesitation, the vague answers, the way she glanced at her son with unease. Her once untouchable facade was crumbling in real time. This wasn't about a car anymore. This was about her standing in the community and how fast it had eroded. When the meeting ended, I approached her one last time. "I'm glad to see you've taken steps to fix the damage," I said. "Rules exist for a reason. When they're enforced fairly, everyone benefits." Karen nodded, stripped of the smugness she once wore like armor. Her son stayed silent, shoulders low, finally understanding that even a harmless joke can have real consequences. The dynamic between us had changed entirely. That laughter that had once echoed at my expense was gone. In its place, quiet respect and a little fear. That day, the message landed exactly where it needed to. Entitlement and thoughtlessness don't override the law. They don't override accountability. And they certainly don't override HOA regulations. I'd handled the situation with precision and patience, turning a small act of vandalism into a lesson that stretched far beyond my own driveway. Wow. Wild how one broken window spiraled into this, right? If you enjoyed watching me put Karen and her son in their place, make sure to hit that like button. Subscribe for more jaw-dropping HOA stories and unforgettable neighborhood moments. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done in my place? Trust me, the next story is one you won't want to miss.